Hi everybody, how are you? Well, my next guest is a Devonshire girl, and what's she doing in Zaragoza? Well, for starters, this animal-loving English rose is shaping the minds of current and future generations of teachers. Sarah Forsey is a language specialist with a deep personal interest in a very specific form of neurodivergence, and I'll let you guess what it is. But here's a clue. All of these remarkable people share it. Whoopi Goldberg, Keira Knightley, Cher, Magic Johnson, Noel Gallagher, Steve Jobs, Leonardo da Vinci, Jennifer Aniston, Pablo Picasso, Steven Spielberg, and even Albert Einstein. Have you got it? Yeah. They're all dyslexic, and they've all excelled in their fields. Now, I first heard about Sarah's fantastic work, especially around dyslexia, through colleagues of mine who had done her courses. So intrigued, I gave her a call, and Sarah kindly invited me into her lovely home, where I was greeted by Sarah, Poppy, her adorable dog, and Max, her big ginger cat, who paraded around like royalty on top of her robotic Hoover. And if you know me, you know that I love cats, so this was a real treat for me. Even if at one point, Max decided to attack the tripod and move the camera, but well, it was all part of the fun of the recording. So during our conversation, I discovered that Sarah's personal and professional journeys very much mirrors my own in many ways, especially how we both ended up living in Zaragoza in the northeast of Spain. She was an absolute joy to talk to, really warm, open and honest. And in this episode, Sarah shares her story, including the challenges and triumphs of raising a dyslexic child. Did you know that there are particular strengths and unique advantages that often come with dyslexia, despite their struggles? So let's get started. I'm delighted to introduce you to the very lovely Sarah Forsey in this episode of Project People called Brilliantly Different. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy it. I want to say thank you for accepting this invitation to Project People. You're only my second English-speaking guest, and it's a real pleasure for me to interview someone in English. It's much easier for me, and so lovely to have a chat. Somebody in a similar situation, living in Zaragoza from the UK.
Yeah.
Tell the listeners a little bit about yourself. What brought you to Spain?
Well, I guess originally it was my love of languages that brought me to Spain, because I studied French at university and I wanted to be a French teacher. But when I graduated, I thought it would be, a good idea to learn Spanish too. I knew a little bit of Spanish, but I didn't speak it fluently. So I thought, well, if I have French and Spanish, growing up, my dad was always a massive fan of Spain. He loved Spain. We came on lots of holidays here. He wanted to move here, but it never ever happened. So I came to Spain to learn Spanish. And I did the TEFL, or the CELTA course to be able to teach English. And I thought, well, I'll spend a few years travelling. I'll come to Spain, learn Spanish, maybe go to Chile or Argentina, then maybe hop over to Japan or Thailand, spend a few years. Then I'll go back and I'll settle down and start teaching properly. That was the plan.
Yeah. And something crossed your path, maybe?
Something did cross my path, yeah. One February day in Granada, of all places. Yeah, I bumped into a man from Zaragoza.
It's always the way, isn't it? With kind of English people that are in Zaragoza, it's kind of a really random place to end up, and there's usually some kind of love connection there.
Yeah. I can still remember the first time I came to Zaragoza, and I think I was on the train, and I remember coming over from Madrid. There's this area that's just nothing. It's like the moon. And I was like, oh my God, where am I going? What is this? I could never be happy here. Yeah. But here I am 20 years later.
It is such a difference, isn't it? Like the landscape, like you say, just when I go home in the summer for a couple of weeks and come back and you, like you say, you're looking out over the kind of barren Mars-like landscape. But it's not too bad here, is it?
No. In fact, the longer I've been here, the more I like it. The first few years were a bit of a struggle, because I'm from Devon in the UK too, which is like the opposite of
Whereabouts in Devon?
On Dartmoor.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, so it's just beautiful and green. It rains just about every day of the year. Wild stunning. Atlantic weather, but beautiful. Yeah, and very different to here. And
so what age did you come here?
I was 24 when I arrived in Spain, and 25 when I came to Zaragoza.
Okay, so tell us about those first couple of years. What did you do? How did you make your way here?
Well, you mean once I'd met my husband and come to Zaragoza? Yeah. Well, I took the plunge and I moved in with him, thinking, well, we'll see how it goes. It's a good way to learn Spanish, if nothing else, you know.
Definitely.
But actually, it was really hard. The first couple of years were really tough because, well, you know what it's like when you're learning a language. Yeah. It takes time and you feel very stupid a lot of the time, and you get very frustrated because you can't understand what everyone's talking about, and you feel quite lonely, even if you're surrounded by people.
That's right.
That was really tough for me, and I thought, I'm not sure I can do this.
Yeah.
But anyway, and then the next problem I had was that my degree in those days, I studied French and education, and my degree wasn't recognised here in Spain.
Yeah.
And when I went to try and get it, like, you know, convalidated, they said to me, well, what do you mean French and education? It has to be French or education, you know, pedagogía. And I said, well, I don't know. So I ended up having to go back to university here for a year.
Oh my God.
And do some exams to be able to get my degree recognised here.
Right. So you did magisterio, is that right?
No, I didn't do magisterio. I have a degree now. I have the homologación.
Okay.
Convalidation, I suppose.
Yeah.
In French, so French philology.
Okay.
And then I did the CAP, which is like the PGCE in the UK.
That's right. Yeah.
To be able to be a secondary school English teacher, because I thought that was the easiest and fastest route.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's what I did. Yeah.
Wow.
So it was a bit of struggle.
It's not easy. They don't make it easy, because I know when my husband was in England and he had to have his certificates convalidated. I don't know if that's an English word. I don't know. You understand Spanglish as well.
Yeah.
But it was no problem at all. But my situation was the same. I was a drama teacher with a degree in drama, and it was just totally unrecognised. The only thing they did recognise was the PGCE CAP.
Right.
Which allowed me to go into teaching as well.
Right, yes.
But no, they don't make it easy for you.
No, really. And for me that was the problem, because by that time I'd been working in academies and I was very happy, but it's not a long-term solution, and I knew that, and I looked into getting into public education or state education, and I needed that teaching qualification, which is what then enabled me to join the British Council bilingual project.
Yep.
So that's
So where did you start? Where were you teaching when you were in the British Council?
Yeah, I started in Hilarion Jimeno, which is just up the road.
Yeah. Which, for the listeners that don't know, is one in Spain. There are a number of British Council bilingual schools that follow the British Council curriculum, if you like, and more or less 40% of the teaching is done in English, would you say?
I would say that, yeah.
And I think Hilarion, if I'm not mistaken, is one of the very first schools that was a bilingual school in Zaragoza, anyway, more than 20 years ago, I would say.
I think 25 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, it was one of the very first.
Yeah.
Because this area used to be it was a difficult area, let's say. And that was one of the objectives, I think, to bring bilingual education to those kind of schools.
So how long were you there teaching?
I worked there for 7 years. Okay. Yeah, and it was great. I loved it. I was thrown straight into 3-year-olds, infants. Yeah. Had absolutely no idea what I was doing, because I'm not I'm trained, kindergarten teacher. No. Luckily, I had a 2-year-old daughter by that point, so I kind of just looked what she was doing, borrowed her books, all the songs I've been singing with her, I just sang with the kids, and I absolutely loved it. I really, really loved it, and I stayed there, and then I worked a couple of years in primary as well, which I also really, really loved, even though I'm not a qualified primary school teacher, but I jumped in and learnt and loved it, and I worked there until I, very surprisingly to me anyway, passed the state exam to become a secondary school teacher, the oposiciones.
Yeah. Do you want to explain a little bit for kind of English listeners what that is? Because it's a concept that doesn't really exist back home, does it?
And when I first heard the word oposición, I was like, what? What's that? Because here it's a big thing, isn't it?
Yes.
People take it very seriously, and they spend years sometimes studying for this exam. Well, it's a state, it's a state exam, an entrance exam, let's say, I suppose. If you want to work in education in the state system here in Spain, you have to at least have taken the exam.
Yes.
And then you go into a sort of big list, depending on how many points you have for your qualifications, your experience, etc., etc. And that way they allocate you a job, or you can, to some extent, choose where you want to work.
And it's a tough exam with a number of different areas that you've got to study, as I understand it. I haven't done it.
Well, I might get into trouble here, but I think it's a ridiculous exam for English anyway, because it's well, as it is at the moment, there's two parts to it. The first part is an English test, which is fine, and then there's another part which is called the topics. Temas, and for secondary school English teachers there are 69 different topics that you need to memorize and learn, and some of them are really quite tough, linguistics and literature and things about English speaking society. When I started to look at the topics, I was like, there's no way I can remember all of this. Absolutely no way. So that can be very frustrating for a lot of people if you don't have the time. Or you don't get lucky, because at the end of the day, in the exam, it's down to luck.
Yes.
You go in and there's it's like bingo. They pull out like 5 numbers, I think, and each number corresponds to a topic. And you choose one. And if you're lucky and it's one you've studied or one fantastic. And if you're unlucky, that's it.
Your year of studying and just losing all your free time in the evenings. I imagine you were a teacher and a mum then when you did your post?
I was working full time at the primary and infant school. I had 2 children. I think Alex was, how old was he, 4 or 5, and Chloe was 8 or 9. I had the dog by this point as well, because I'm crazy. And every weekend I was studying, every evening once the kids had gone to bed. And actually when I did the first part of the exam, because they're on 2 separate days, if you don't pass the first round, you don't get through to the second round. I came out of the exam crying. I cried for 24 hours because I was so sure I hadn't passed the topic part. The English part was all right, but you have to get a minimum grade. And I was so sure that I hadn't passed. And in the end, I got the minimum grade, let's say, to be able to get through to the next round. And that's where I did really well.
Amazing. Absolutely. Well done, because it's something that, I've thought about over the years and never got around to doing. But it's allowed you to develop professionally, because presumably after you passed that, you went into secondary teaching. And if you want to link that with what you're doing now and tell us a little bit about what you're doing now.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I also have to say that I didn't want to do this exam because of those reasons. I thought, I can't do this, but it was my husband. He was like, come on, all the advantages. And in the end, I did it kind of almost for him, I suppose. But it's really changed my life. It really has, because I passed. And then I had to do my newly qualified teacher year, let's say, in a school here in Zaragoza. It was a pretty tough school. It wasn't, particularly, good experience, but it taught me a lot. And then I was called to work in something called the Carlet, which is where I work now. I've been there for nearly 10 years now.
So what's the Carlet?
Okay, well, the Carlet started off as an experimental sort of project. The name Carlet is an acronym for the letters. It's like the Aragonese Center for Foreign Languages in Education. Do you want me to say in Spanish?
Well done. Yes, of course.
Centro Aragonés para Lenguas Extranjeras en la Educación.
Very good.
I think, unless I've made a mistake there somewhere. And basically it's a sort of teacher training organisation for teachers who are already in service, teachers who have already passed all their exams and who are already working. And it's like sort of continual development. Specialising initially in teachers who work in bilingual education. Yes, that's a big thing here in Aragon.
That's right.
So helping those teachers improve their language levels, first of all, and then helping them with methodology. Because it's one thing to speak in a language, but it's another thing to try and teach history or music or art in that language. And also teach the language at the same time. So that's what the Carlet aims to do, basically.
Change that kind of outlook on methodology, because I know certainly when I arrived, I've been on the project 20 years more or less, the methodology of Spanish schools was very old-fashioned. It was grammar-based, it was memorization. They didn't really have any kind of like CLIL teaching skills. And I know that Carlet has contributed a lot to to training teachers.
Yeah. The change in methodology is one of the objectives of the Carlet, to move it away from more passive sort of rote memorization, which still happens, and you know, sometimes it still has to happen. It's not always a bad thing, but it's more active methodologies that fit more with.
So you work with teachers.
Yes,
you've got
I
a
do.
different timetable. Presumably you're working in the evenings. Maybe
Every day is a little bit. Every week is a bit different.
Yeah.
But generally, I mean, that was one of the problems initially.
Yeah.
I had to work most evenings,
Yeah.
which was tough with young children.
Of course.
But anyway, it was better than having the alternative, which was at that point to work a long way away from Zaragoza. So it depends. If I don't have courses and workshops and activities in the afternoon, I go into the office and work in the mornings.
Okay.
But if we have, obviously today I have cooperative learning workshop with a wonderful teacher called Eli Catalan. I don't know if you know her.
I do know her. She's great.
She's coming along to do a workshop for teachers, and I'm going along because I'm the asesora. So I'm the coordinator of that group.
Wonderful.
So I don't always teach. Sometimes I'm just organising, and coordinating.
No, it's an amazing organisation. I really enjoy the courses that the Carlet do, and where it comes to bilingual learning. Okay, I know that you've got a special interest in dyslexia, and I know you've done courses for teachers in dyslexia. Some of those teachers that I know have been completely bowled over of how great those courses are.
Thank you.
Just to kind of go back to sort of like bare bones, could you sort of like explain what dyslexia is?
Yeah, well, basically, at the very basic level, dyslexia is a type of neurodivergence. It's just the wiring of the brain is just a little bit different. And what that means is when people are processing information, especially in the form of written text, they don't process it. Dyslexic people don't process that information in quite the same way that non-dyslexic people do. So moving away from terms such as, it's a problem, it's a difficulty, or even a disability, it's just it's a difference. Okay. So does mean that people that have dyslexia have certain challenges, let's say, especially with the education system as it is very much based on reading and writing.
Yes.
Reading and writing is very difficult for people with dyslexia because they process the information they're reading more slowly, and they have more confusion and more difficulties understanding. And then when they have to produce and write, again, it takes more effort. It's slower. They make more mistakes with spelling. I mean, that's the most, I think, common thing when you think of dyslexia is spelling problems. So,
it's interesting because I was thinking about sort of how it would be to be dyslexic in English and in Spanish. I mean, certainly spelling in English is challenging for non-dyslexic students. And Spanish is so much more, as English is just might not know, but Spanish is kind of pronounced how it's spelt.
Yeah.
If you like. So, is there like a higher rate? Do you know sort of between England and Spain?
I don't know statistically. I do know that yes. I mean, when students here, dyslexic students, are learning English, they do have problems with English because it's such an opaque language, especially with a lot of the words that are very high, we call them high frequency words. I mean, not all of them are tricky to read or spell, but a lot of them are. So that,
for example, can you give us a few?
Well, for example, she, he, you, all these words that you see again and again and again are tricky for everyone learning to read and write in English, even native speakers. But for dyslexic people, these words can be especially challenging. Yes, because dyslexic people tend to be, I mean, I don't know the statistics, I'm not an expert, I'm still learning. They tend to be visual thinkers. Whereas, non-dyslexic people, we tend to think more verbally. We have this sort of inner monologue going on in our brain. Whereas dyslexic people often think in pictures or in 3D, almost like they're seeing a movie. And when they see a word, if it's very difficult to visualize, that can cause a lot of problems and confusion as well. So
do they get to kind of like recognize words as a kind of picture, if you like?
I mean, that can be a really great strategy for helping not just dyslexic students, but any students, remember the correct spelling of a word, okay? If you can use any sort of multi-sensorial methods, especially with really young children, then that's going to help, but especially with dyslexic students, if you can try and make that word visual or memorable, because that's another problem that people with dyslexia have. It's not just reading and writing. There are some other things that you might notice. For example, memorization of things like sequences, the alphabet, days of the week, months of the year, multiplication tables. That can be really challenging. Wow. So anything that's going to help or work as a memory aid is really going to help people with dyslexia. Obviously everybody else as well.
What brought you to have this kind of special interest in dyslexia?
Well, there were a couple of different reasons. The first, and I think a main reason, is a personal interest. My husband, Ricardo, is a writer, but he's dyslexic.
Wow.
And the conversation came up because he was trying to pass some English exams, and I was helping him do the writing. I was like, Ricardo, your spelling is terrible. And he was like, well, don't be angry with me. I'm dyslexic, And I said, are you? I didn't know that. And he said, yeah. He was diagnosed when he was a teenager. But never got any help.
Wow.
Do you know what I mean? It was you're dyslexic. That's why. And he had to repeat the school year. He had a lot of problems, especially with English. He was good at English, but he couldn't do the exams. He couldn't ever write properly in English, and he still can't. So he's dyslexic. And then when my daughter was I think she was about 7 or 8, I started to be a little bit worried because I thought she wasn't reading and writing as well as she should be. And we got some sort of tests done at school, and it was a little bit inconclusive, and they gave her a little bit of extra support, and somebody said, well, maybe it's because she's bilingual too, that might be confusing her with the spellings. So we sort of left it. And then when she got to secondary, I was still worried. And she was still reading very slowly. Very reluctant reader.
Didn't enjoy reading.
No, and you should never compare children. But my son was just a bookworm. And we've always had loads of books at home. And he was just devouring books, and she was very happy to listen to stories, but she didn't want to pick up a book and read ever. Although she does, And I just thought, why is that? And the spelling was still a problem, and she often ran out of time in the exams. And so anyway, we decided to investigate a little bit. I couldn't leave it, I mean, she was never failing or anything, but I was like, there's something that's just not quite right here. And after a few years, it took a while, we got a diagnosis that she was dyslexic.
How old was she when you got that?
Well, the official diagnosis, she was, I think she was almost 16, so she'd almost finished ESO.
She got through it.
Wow.
Like, the Spanish system here, sorry to interrupt, the Spanish system here, academically, comparing it to the English system, I think is brutal.
It's very tough.
It's really tough. The level of maths, the level of memorization, more than anything that you have to do, is really, really tough.
Very, very tough.
And for a dyslexic child, I imagine
she really struggled with maths,
of course,
and we couldn't work out why. My husband was helping her, teaching her, but she just couldn't memorize all these things that you need to. It is tough, really grueling.
Terrible. Once diagnosed, did she receive any help in sort of the A level?
Well, this is when it really happened, because I think until the end of ESO, which is like the compulsory education, the grades, how much do they really matter unless you want to apply for a scholarship or something? Chloe was never failing. She was always doing all right. But it's when they get to A levels here, the bachillerato, the baccalaureate, that's when it gets competitive. And that's when the grades really count. So that's when we asked the school to really, step in, and we had to make a bit of a fuss, I think, because the poor schools, they are overwhelmed. They do have a lot of kids with special needs, and because my daughter wasn't a sort of particularly serious case, I had to be a bit of a pushy mum.
Sometimes it's necessary, isn't it?
So that's when she started getting proper help in terms of, I mean, not much really. All my cat's just moving your camera. Max.
You cheeky cat. And we've got this big ginger Tom that's attacking the tripod at the moment.
Max.
I'm holding it still.
It's just moved. I don't know whether I'm even in shot anymore.
Let me just check. What a cheeky boy.
Remember that? Oh, A-levels. Yeah, the
so-
accommodations.
How did they help her at school in A-levels?
Right. Well, I mean, because she wasn't a child that was really struggling and she'd got that far anyway.
Yeah.
Basically, she was allowed more time in exams.
Yeah.
And they were a little bit more lenient with spelling in the non-linguistic subjects.
Right.
You know, as long as the content and what she was saying was okay.
Yeah.
They didn't, you know, penalise her for all the spelling mistakes.
Yeah.
Which gave her a boost, to be honest. I mean, some people are really worried when their children are diagnosed with dyslexia because they think, oh my goodness, what's going to happen now? Oh, that's a disaster. But actually, for my daughter, it was quite empowering. It was like, oh, Mum, I'm not stupid.
Yes, of course.
You know, it's not that I'm not studying hard enough, because she really worked hard.
Yeah.
And she gave herself headaches.
Oh, poor girl.
To get her 6 or 7,
Yeah.
whereas some of her friends were getting 9s and 10s.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, now I get it, Mum. Now I understand. And then that empowered her, and she was able to kind of work on strategies and study techniques, and
now she's at uni, you said?
she's at uni and she's doing
brilliant.
really well.
Yeah,
She's really pleased. And at uni they're also you know, things have changed a lot here in Spain, and now at university as well, if you have a diagnosis, again they can make accommodations for you, and she's allowed extra time in exams, and again a little bit more leniency with spellings. I mean, we have to keep fighting because there's so much more you can do for dyslexic students, but still.
And I mean, in my case, I've been teaching for years, and I'm in year 3 and year 4, just like 8, 9, 10 years old. Every child's different. I've currently got 2 dyslexic students. One is absolutely bright as a button, brilliant English, spoken English, but I can put a text in front of her and she'll just look at me and say, I can't see it. I can't see it. So we've adapted strategies like changing the font with the open dyslexic font, which kind of like slightly shaded at the bottom of the letters. And I say, why does this work? And I was talking to her mum the other day, and she said, because she says that the words kind of sit.
Right, they don't move around.
They don't move around. And it really is. I mean, I can see her. She just has a blindness with certain texts.
Right.
And, you know, it's a lot of extra work to prepare different activities for her or adapt the text. But, you know, once you've got it for other students. And then there are other cases where it's kind of just a slight dyslexia, but, you know, it's been diagnosed and they seem to kind of get through it. But they, you know, obviously need to have support. And I think the problem is, you know, for years, I don't think teachers have had enough training.
No.
And it's great that I know that you're doing a lot of training in this area now, and it's really helping. In fact, one of my colleagues went to one of your courses and came back and tried to give us the training.
Oh, brilliant.
Which is really,
that's exactly what should be happening.
Helpful.
Well, that was another reason why I've kind of developed this interest. It was a personal interest. But also in the Carle, one of the things that we're trying to help with is you know, inclusive education and catering for the diversity that you have in the classroom. You know, because if you're trying to teach, you know, in a foreign language, that's a difficulty in itself sometimes, not always. But then if you have children with other special educational needs, you know, it can be really challenging. So we've been trying to train ourselves in the last couple of years in, you know, inclusive teaching methods, but not just, you know, for those students that need it, but really for everybody. You know, the idea of universal design for learning, which is a big thing now here in Aragon as well. Just trying to adapt materials so that they are as accessible as possible for everybody. You know, designing materials so that they can be read, you know, easily, or making sure that the methodology that you're using in the classroom is not just, you know, traditional rote memorization, because that doesn't suit everybody.
No, that's right.
It suits some kids, but not everybody. So
things are changing slowly but
things
surely,
are changing,
but they are changing.
Yeah, absolutely. So.
I just have a little bit of curiosity when it comes to kind of girls and boys. Is there a difference between girls and boys when it comes to dyslexia?
And it's an interesting question, and I hope I'm correct in saying this, but statistically, dyslexia is more frequent, more common among boys.
Wow, okay.
But there may be a reason for that. That often girls sort of try to hide, or they find strategies to work around things, to not stand out, you know, to blend in. So they often are just undiagnosed.
Right.
So it's not necessarily that there are more boys than girls.
Yeah.
But it's just that there's more diagnoses for
They
boys.
have more kind of social skills to get through situations,
perhaps, yeah.
I know I've heard that with ADHD as well. That
Yeah.
a lot of times girls are undiagnosed
Sure.
because they kind of find ways, strategies like so.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and
That's
often
interesting.
children that have dyslexia may also have ADHD. For example, there's an overlap there.
Right.
Sometimes, not always. But yeah.
It must affect, so until they get the help and the acknowledgement, it must affect so much their confidence.
Yeah.
Yes,
I mean, I think this is one of the main reasons why it's important to receive training, you know, as teachers, because the impact that it can have potentially on kids is huge.
Yes.
There are some really wonderful videos from the British Dyslexia Association that sort of document cases of kids who, they just feel stupid, frustrated, angry, or even really upset and depressed sometimes, or they turn the other way and they start misbehaving, and they get labelled, you know, this is the naughty kid, this is the kid that just doesn't try hard, you try harder, come on. So it can be really have a really negative impact on these kids.
Is it difficult to get it diagnosed? Do you need to have like the school flag it up, and what happens if the teachers don't flag it up? Because I know there are cases that I've seen over the years where parents have gone privately to find the diagnosis because the school or doesn't have resources to find it, or haven't kind of like flagged it as an issue. Yeah,
well, the first thing is to go to the school, to go to the tutor, and then the tutor will need to speak to the orientación department, the school's counselling service. Is that what we would translate that as?
I suppose so.
And then they would have to investigate and look into it, and I mean, it's not always easy to diagnose either. Do you know what I mean? Like and there are no two dyslexics that are the same.
Yes.
You know, there's this phrase, you know, how blonde do you need to be blonde? You know, like how dyslexic do you need to be dyslexic?
Wow.
Sometimes it's just a sort of mild dyslexia, and that can be very difficult to detect and diagnose.
How do they diagnose it? What kind of tests are there?
Well, I'm not an expert in this area. I think there are all kinds of different tests they do. It's not just writing and spelling. It's like I say, about laterality and memorization and things. I must admit, I'm not really sure.
It's quite complex.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And if the school doesn't, you know, or can't, because of the lack of resources, you know, reach that diagnosis, then the next step, if parents can afford it, because it's quite an expensive process, is to go to a private sort of place.
And once that diagnosis has been given, are the school obliged to use special measures or to adapt the curriculum?
Only if the school has reached the diagnosis. For example, you can go to a private place and bring back their report, but that doesn't mean anything.
Okay.
They can then use that information, the school can then use that information, I believe, to then, you know, continue with the tests and reach a conclusion. But yes, if the school decides that yes, there is a diagnosis there, then yes, legally they are obliged to.
That's good.
To set up a series of measures to accommodate those children. Definitely, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And are there any advantages of having a dyslexic brain?
Oh yes. I'm so glad you asked that question. Because again, this is one of the things. You think, dyslexia, problems, challenges, difficulties. Yeah. But the dyslexic brain is a wonderful thing, actually. I mean, people who are dyslexic, I already told you, they are they are visual thinkers.
Okay.
Which means they are really good at things like sort of designing things, or, you know, being able to see in 3D. So they make really good architects, apparently.
Yeah.
Apparently they're quite creative. Yeah. They can be very communicative and be wonderful, wonderful storytellers. Yeah. So, you know, there are lots and lots of advantages to being dyslexic. In fact, I have heard, and I'm not sure, I have to check that this is true, but there are some companies that even look for dyslexic people to hire them because of this sort of extra creativity.
Oh wow!
I have to do some research. I'm not entirely sure, but I have heard that rumor. So
is it true in the case of your husband and daughter?
I think so. Yeah. Yes, I think so. They're both quite creative people. Yeah. I mean, my husband's an engineer by day. That's what he does to earn money. But he's a writer, poet by night.
Oh, amazing!
So dyslexic poet. So
that's incredible.
Yeah, he uses a lot of obviously tools to help with the spelling. You know, technology is a great help for people with dyslexia. Yeah.
And I wonder how important spelling's going to be in the future.
Wow,
with
yeah.
everything digital these days.
Yeah,
will we
do
need
wonder.
to know how to
Will
spell?
we know how to spell? Will we know how to memorize our times tables? Yeah, it's kind of sad, but true.
But
yeah.
Amazing.
And yeah.
And do you know any famous dyslexic people?
Oh yes. Well, I don't know any, but, but again, yeah. When I went, something I forgot to mention was that last May, I went on an Erasmus Plus mobility course to Budapest.
Lovely.
And I did a week-long course called Dyslexia and Inclusive Language Teaching. And it was wonderful.
Oh, wow.
It was really, the teacher was really good. I met some really lovely people, and Budapest, of course, is
gorgeous.
Really, really nice. Did I say Budapest? It wasn't Budapest. Can you edit? No, it was Budapest. It was Budapest. Hungary, yeah. I was thinking Bucharest.
No,
Budapest.
we're not editing it.
Oh,
no,
God. No, yeah. I got it right. It's fine. Yeah. And it was really, really, really interesting. And on that course, the focus was definitely in all the good. It was very reassuring. And we watched this lovely video of famous people, famous people alive and dead.
Yeah.
For example, actors like Orlando Bloom and Whoopi Goldberg, Keira Knightley.
Wow.
They're all dyslexic people.
Okay.
Some famous sort of people in the past. I don't know how they tested them or diagnosed them, to be honest. But apparently Einstein was dyslexic.
Wow.
And there's loads and loads of famous like architects and people who are generally very creative.
And there's absolutely no link to sort of intelligence. Dyslexia doesn't mean that you're not intelligent. It's just, like you said before, a different way of processing.
Not at all.
Yeah.
No. And in fact, when you're trying to get a diagnosis, that has to be something that is kind of assessed as well.
Yeah.
Because sometimes people have problems with reading and spelling because of their intelligence. It's not that they're dyslexic. Okay. So that is part of the screening process, I suppose. So no, it's definitely not about intelligence. No.
What advice would you give to a parent that's perhaps picked up signs like yourself with your situation with your daughter, or teachers that are not quite sure? What advice would you give these people?
Well, I think I would investigate. Don't just think, wow, it's not that bad. They'll be all right, because it could change their lives. You know, I often wonder with my daughter, if we hadn't got her that help in the A-level years, whether she would have got through the end of the exam, which is called the eval. Now it's just changed, I think. I can't remember what they call it now, but this horrible exam. I'm not sure whether she would have had the strength to get through that. Without knowing why it was extra difficult for her, and without having those extra accommodations that helped her. I don't know whether she would even have got to university. Do you know what I mean? So it could be life-changing. I mean, obviously we don't want to try and diagnose everybody that has some slight problem with reading and writing. That's not the case either. But if you are worried, if you do suspect that, you know, if you do spot some of the signs of dyslexia, it's definitely worth investigating for that child, because it could make a huge difference to their whole life, basically.
So that's brilliant, Sarah. You've really clarified loads of things about dyslexia. Would you say things are getting better?
Definitely.
Right.
And if we look at the sort of changing perspectives over the last, let's say, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, I mean, comparing my husband's experience at high school with my daughter's, things are really improving. We're learning so much more. Teachers are more aware. I mean, again, you asked me before what advice I would give to a teacher as well, is if you can't do anything else, just try to be dyslexia aware and dyslexia friendly, basically, and teach in a way that's going to be okay for your dyslexic students, which means you're going to be teaching, you know, in a way that's going to be great for all of your students.
For all of the students,
it's not a question of designing different materials or doing extra things. No, it's just good teaching practices, basically.
It's brilliant. Brilliant, really, really useful. I want to thank you, first of all, for sort of agreeing to do this.
It's a pleasure.
And I know that you had a little accident a couple of days ago, and you're saying, Louise, I don't know if I can because I've got a cut. I don't think anyone can see.
Anybody notice the cut on my forehead?
So.
I don't know.
What happened?
It's a silly story, really, but it's got something to do with my pets. I have a dog, a beautiful dog called Poppy, and a lovely, lovely ginger cat called Max, and they are my animals, and they live with the family, but I'm the responsible person. I wanted them, so I look after them. And I went out on Friday night and didn't feed the cat, assuming that somebody would feed him. Nobody fed him. So he woke me up at about, I think it was 5 o'clock in the morning, kind of going, meow, I'm starving.
Hungry.
Meow. So I got out of bed and fed him.
Yeah.
And because I was desperately trying not to wake anybody up,
Yeah.
I didn't put the lights on.
Yeah.
So on the way back to bed, I crashed into my bathroom door frame and cut my head open, and there was blood everywhere. I woke up with a great bump on my head. So I don't know whether to blame the cat or my husband, to be honest, for not feeding him.
Always blame the husband. Cat comes first. You love animals then, Sarah?
I really do. I grew up with lots of animals, and I mean, I think it's a very British thing too.
Yeah.
We love our dogs, especially, and I always wanted to have a dog.
Yeah.
So I insisted on getting a dog.
Yeah.
And she's absolutely wonderful. She's now she's here on the floor next to us.
Yeah. She's
fallen
absolutely
asleep.
gorgeous. She's such a pretty dog.
Yeah. No, she's lovely. She's a rescue dog. Okay. We got her from the municipal, pound, I suppose you would call it.
Yeah.
And she'd been run over or something. She had a broken leg.
Oh,
and she'd been there for 4 months.
Oh.
And we went along and we were like, that's the dog. That's our dog.
Did you know straight away?
Straight away, yeah. Well, actually, it was my husband that found her. She was in a little back sort of building because she wasn't ready for adoption because she was still healing.
Okay.
And he was like, what about this one? And she was just perfect.
Oh.
Yeah. And she's been the most wonderful, wonderful dog.
Yeah.
She's been really, really great. And it's hard work. But
And what about your ginger Tom? Because I also have a ginger Tom, which is well, I adore him, but he does get me up in the night, flinging things off surfaces.
Yeah. Well, I can relate to that because my cat, we've had him for 4 years now. Never intended to have a house cat. He was supposed to be a sort of village cat. We fell in love. He's just adorable, and he lives with us in the flat most of the time, but we take him to the village at weekends. Yeah. And now he's kind of quite calm and quite chilled, but when he was younger, like your cat, he would do. And sometimes he has moments of madness, like before with the camera, he was attacking things and playing. But I mean, they give me so much work. Yeah. Cleaning and shopping and vets and... walking, but at the same time I wouldn't have it any other way. They bring so much happiness to our lives. And
the cat's a rescue cat as well.
Well, he's a street cat. In like many Spanish people, we go to a village at the weekends and in the summer. And our neighbours were thinking of getting some kittens because they had problems with rats. And I said, oh, fantastic. We'll help you look after them in the summer and then they can just stay here. Yeah. Well, we fell in love and the cat came back with us. So he is a kind of rescue. He was supposed to be a village, like a wild cat. Yeah. But no, he's not wild at all. He's very domestic. And
I just saw him travelling around Sarah's lovely house, sat on the rumba. Is it a rumba in English? One of those... I
don't know what you call them in English.
It's like a robot hoover. Is that right? Robot vacuum. And he was just sat perched on it like a little gentleman.
Oh, he loves it. He's so a very silly cat. He makes us laugh because he does so many silly... My husband, my son adores the cat. Yeah. And the cat came at a very good time, actually, because my father died in 2018. My father-in-law died very suddenly in 2019. Wow. And then the pandemic hit in 2020 when my son was only about 8 or 9 or 10. Yeah. And he got really bad anxiety and was terrified about everyone dying, obviously. And then that summer in 2021 was when we got the cat. Right. And for him, it's been a game changer. He adores the cat. And they do say that cats, and dogs as well.
He just popped up.
They do help you with stress.
Hello, Max.
Just listening to them purr, stroking them.
Hello, Poppy.
And there's Poppy. Okay. Poppy's very jealous.
Hello,
she's going to not let you stroke the cat without stroking her too.
Can Poppy come up so we can see her lovely face?
Yeah, come here, Pops.
And then we'll finish off. Oh,
a little bit difficult to pick up.
Oh, you don't have to pick. Oh my goodness me, she is gorgeous.
Yes, she is.
She's lovely. So here we go. Sarah, Poppy, Max, thank you so much. This is my first podcast with animals. And I think it won't be the last because they're absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Sarah.
Thank you to you. It's been a great thing. Thank you.